Welcome to the program. My guest is Drew Thomas Allen. He is the author of America's Last Stand. Will you vote to save or destroy America in 2024? He says on his blog site, our present conflict is unprecedented in our own nation's history and in our own lifetimes, and marks the third major test which will determine whether America survives or dies. Previous major tests being the American Revolution and the Civil War. So, Drew, why is this election? Not that every election isn't important, but there's something about this election, and I think we all sense it, that makes it a pivotal watershed, as the media likes to say, event in American history and in the history of our future as a sovereign nation. Yeah, what say you?
Well, sure. Firstly, I'll acknowledge that people say every election is the most important election, that we've had, and that may very well be true, but this is different because the stakes are higher and it's not business as usual. I mean, we are dealing with not just a Democrat party, but call it a deep state. Rhinos are involved in this too, but we're
Hmm.
dealing with actual tyrants who are plotting basically the end of our constitutional republic. And I think that if they succeed in 2024, it really is the end. I mean, America will exist nominally, but I don't think elections and so on and so forth are going to have much of a difference down the road. If you just look at the persecution of Trump, this lawfare, which is
Hmm.
totally unlawful what they're doing. Trump hasn't committed a single crime, and they're using a corrupt justice system to go after him. This is what they do in banana republics. This is something that doesn't happen in America. So if you can understand that and start to look at these things are happening in America that are not supposed to happen here, you get an inkling of just how different this election is from others. And the thing is, it's not just the first time they've attempted to interfere in elections. I mean, that's the thing too. We're kind of seeing the climax of this tyrannical movement to really steal in perpetuity the power that belongs to the American people. 2016, we had Trump Russia collusion. And of course, that transitioned over into his presidency and was a coup attempt, quid pro quo, the J6 insurrection. But you go to 2020 and you have the suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop. Absolutely. The mail in ballots were used to cheat. Look, I mean, I don't know how to say it. People want to because if you're on YouTube, you're not supposed to
Well,
talk about it.
Drew, we're not on YouTube, so we can talk about it.
Yeah. I mean,
Forget
it's
YouTube.
it's just remarkable. I mean, 2020 they absolutely stole the election, and the reason they've
Indeed.
gone through all this, the reason they had January 6th, January 6th was not a Trump-led insurrection. It was a Democrat coordinated fake insurrection to ensure that Joe Biden was rubber stamped. The certification was rubber stamped because
Yes,
remember, we
indeed.
were going to have a debate. It was lawful. We were going to air all this dirty laundry, and they prevented that from happening by having this
Oh yeah, no, you're right.
concoction.
Yeah. Let's just focus on that for a minute here, because putting aside the cockamamie conspiracy theory they ran on for 3 years, which is that Putin colluded or conspired really with Trump to steal the 2016 election. That's what we spent $35 million on with Mueller looking into that. He realized he couldn't back it, but they got a lot of mileage out of it. Then they have the perfect phone call impeachment, where Trump basically asked Zelensky to look into what in fact has absolutely been proven to be the case, and that is the corruption of the Biden family with Ukraine and other countries. And then finally, the cherry on the cake was the J6 so-called insurrection after the stolen election, which was done in broad daylight. Everyone saw it. All of a sudden, all of the battleground states stopped counting publicly, while Trump is way ahead. Should have been a landslide. And then suddenly we find out later that they didn't stop counting. They kept counting. They got shipments of ballots, pallets of ballots, especially in Michigan and Arizona and Georgia. And that there's all this business about the electronic voting. I'm sure you're following right now the trial in Georgia, Fulton County, which actually was originally initiated by Stacey Abrams, and now is finally in the courtroom, where the prosecutor picked up electronic voting machine, and he altered the vote using a big pen. I mean, it was so obvious. So you have that, and then of course, as you say, Drew, exactly correctly, the so-called insurrection, which is what it was called the next day, coordinatedly by the media, basically put a cap on the stolen election. It could no longer be questioned. Anybody who did question it was removed from social media. Thousands of people lost their accounts at that time. I did as well. I mean, President Trump lost his account. 10 million followers on Twitter simply dropped into the ether. And Parler was taken down. They were really starting to move up, and they really felt like they could censor everything. And it was really actually a coup d'état. You say accurately that they basically stopped the assembly. The assembly, which is constitutional, which is something that has happened in every election, the challenges, I should say, going back to Jefferson, um, involves at least one senator and one representative jointly signing a letter and requesting a hearing for a select state because there were questions about the legitimacy of the election. And then once that happens, the president of the assembly, who happens to also be the vice president of the United States, calls for a hearing, which can take place and which can last up to 2 hours, in which the evidence is presented. And at the end of that hearing, the president of the assembly can decide whether or not to seat that delegation. That's what was underway on January 6th. There were 7 states that had scheduled hearings, all of the battleground states, plus New Mexico. And the whole thing was interrupted when, the QAnon shaman with his Viking hat showed up in the chamber, and they shut the whole thing down, resulting in them reconvening around midnight without any media present, without any hearings, where they just gavelled Biden through. That's a coup d'etat.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. That is what happened. And look, I mean, it's hard. A lot of Americans don't want to contemplate this. The reality is, all this destruction that we've experienced over the last 3 years, now going on 4, of course, um, it should never have happened. We've been living under a truly illegitimate government, which, of course, the Democrats say that all day long. Trump's illegitimate. We actually are living under an illegitimate government,
Indeed.
and the thing we're going through right now as a nation, which is painful for us, is part of it's mental. We've kind of allowed ourselves to get to this point because we have ourselves rejected the constitutional principles that have maintained this country, which of course dictates that the American people, the citizen, is the master and those in government are the servant. But you have a totally different situation now where you have Joe Biden coming out and basically goading the American people, putting it in our face when he says, if you want to come for the government, you better have F-16s. You better have nuclear weapons. I mean, this is the thing. People aren't really, we're so numb to so much of this that I don't think that people realize the gravity of the things that are happening. So when a president of the United States basically goads the American people and makes fun of the Declaration of Independence, essentially, which tells us that if we have a tyrannical government, it's actually our right to exchange it with another. He comes and says, while he comes and tries to take away our AR-15s, he's also telling us, you better get some F-16s and nuclear weapons if you want to take on the government. I mean, it's a threat to the American people. So this is where we are in the country, and that's what we're facing. People who are lawless, people who don't care about the Constitution, a bunch of bureaucrats, elected politicians who want to rule over us. And so this election is about determining whether or not the American people are going to continue on this path in which we do accept our new roles as serfs, or if we're going to reclaim our destiny and give the double-barreled middle finger to the tyrants in Washington, D.C. and say, no, we remember what our documents say. We remember the sacrifices that came before us. We know what 1776 was about, and you represent that. And we are going to use the peaceful process to get rid of you, and we're not going to stop. So that's what this boils down to. And that's why I say in the book, it's America's last stand. Are you going to vote to save or destroy America in 2024? It's not hyperbole, it's truth.
No, I think that kind of violent language is in a way they're baiting us to have an incident. The J6 event, I think it's been now proven by several legitimate reporters, including Darren Beatty and Julie Kelly, who both have done amazing work on this, that it was threaded with federal agents. Ray Epps being one of the more prominent, when he's like, "You got to go into the Capitol," right? Whoever thought of that?
Yep.
Where'd that come from?
Yeah.
He's recently, finally, 3 years later, sentenced with a slap on the wrist, no jail time, where you could have a guy like Owen Schroyer, who's a reporter and a journalist, standing on the front lawn telling people not to go into the Capitol, and he had to do 4 months in prison. So, I mean, Enrico Tarrio, who was the head of the Proud Boys,
Bingo.
he's 20, 22 years, and he wasn't
And he
even
was
in
in Baltimore,
Washington.
Maryland. He was in Baltimore, Maryland when it happened. He wasn't even at the Capitol.
Yeah, and not to mention, not that it matters, but he happens to be a man of color. But
Yep.
which the left usually would have an explosion. But the point here is that this was an imprisonment for dissent, for opinion, and it sent a chilling result and message to people like yourself and me. When are the FBI going to knock on my door? You wonder what the hell is going on. I mean, you have them coming in and pulling people out of bed at 5 o'clock in the morning, parading them out onto the front lawn with the media there, like they did to Roger Stone, an elderly
Yep.
man. His wife is in the house. She's hard of hearing, never committed a crime in his life. They've done this. I mean, these perp walks and all of it. It's very much like the Gestapo. I'm speaking here. I'm not going to mince words about that. I have a Jewish background, and I'm very sensitive to that because, my family has memories about what it was like to be in Nazi Germany. This does remind us of that. This is what's going on. We have a nationalization of the police. We've got a demonization of the opponents of the regime, who are legitimate opponents and who have an opinion, whether you agree with it or not. And you now have I think there's 200 or 300 men and women in prison around the country, apparently, that are being held because they were even on the lawn that day. So, this is, I think that they thought they would go further too. The only reason they didn't, plus they impeached Trump a second time after, while he already had left office. The only reason they didn't get away with it is because we have these alternative media outlets. We've got Rumble, we've got Gab, we've got Getter, we've got Rockfin, we've got all these other outlets that have not been suppressed but are growing, and that people are being heard. So there are enough people out there who are, as we like to say, red pilled, and
Mm-hmm.
who are willing to stand up for the country and for our own lives and our own futures, which is exactly what we're dealing with here.
Yeah, and a couple of things. One, this should be such an easy election. It should be a landslide. I do obviously do believe that Trump can win. He got more votes in 2020 than he did in 2016, but we can't take it for granted and assume that's going to happen
No.
either. And we're already seeing what the playbook is from the left. And let me put it in these terms. Well, firstly, let me say this. You've got Joe Biden and his White House, who just shockingly announced that he's now, a year later after it happened, going to go and visit East Palestine, Ohio, right?
Yes.
And so this is like, remember when he finally went to the border after 2 years of ignoring it? I mean, they're going to have to get out there in East Palestine and clear out the actual residents and bring in, some
Mm.
Lincoln Project members to dress like, Ohioans, so he's not getting the middle finger when he shows up. But
Yeah.
what we're seeing is they're going through a checklist now, a campaign checklist of all those things that he deserves to be hit for on the campaign trail. And we're about to be just drowning in propaganda, more so than we've even seen thus far in this administration. So, he's going to East Palestine so there can be a photo op so CNN can tell their ignorant viewers, no, he does care about blue collar workers. He went to East Palestine because the argument, of course, is he never showed up. He never went. So they can say, oh, he did go to the border. He cares. It doesn't matter what the
Mm.
truth is. So we have today, for example, they're pumping out these amazing job numbers, right? They're saying this is amazing,
Oh
amazing,
yeah,
amazing.
sure. The
Yeah.
Department of Labor is cooking the books just like they did for Obama,
Well,
apparently.
Q2 of 2022, people need to remember this. This is why actually my push for the book right now is we've got to get grounded in reality and remember what happened, because we're going to be disoriented soon with all these lies. Q2 of 2022, never forget. The Biden administration and the same Department of Labor came out and said we created over 1 million jobs in Q2. Okay, they said that. And then we got to December, and the Philadelphia Fed actually looked at the numbers and said, actually, you lied. You only created 10,000 jobs. In other words, the administration lied by 1 million jobs, in Q2.
I think that they also, and this is something that I think is fairly public, that they count people on unemployment as employed. They have a job because they're getting income. And the other factor is that people are getting 2 and 3 jobs because it now costs $15 to get a Big Mac and fries at McDonald's. I mean, if you have a family of 5, 3 children and two parents, that's $75 to go to McDonald's. So I don't think that anyone's going to buy this from them, that this economy is so great and rosy. I just don't see it. I mean, the average people are like, what? I mean, we all know every time you step out the door, it's like, a $20 bill now is about the equivalent of a $5 bill was 5 years ago.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's what they're asking you to do, suspend, reality. They're asking you to ignore what your bills are, don't pay attention to what is actually happening, and just believe what they're telling you instead, right? You walk outside and you're getting, it's hailing on you, and they're telling you that the sun is shining. I mean, that's what they're up. That's all they have right now because they cannot defend, obviously Marxism, which is destructive in what they've done to the country. But it's not going to stop them from trying. If you look at what they're doing with the border, which is insane, obviously Biden owns this open border, Mayorkas, this administration. But you have plenty of rhinos who are willing to throw in with the Democrats in an effort to prevent Trump from being reelected. So it's like the Inflation Reduction Act. Remember, that had nothing to do with inflation, but they called it that. Well, now we have this phony border bill that the Senate is trying to pass, and rhinos are joining in on that, which is not a border bill. It's like the Inflation Reduction Act. It legalizes illegal immigration.
And he could have easily held the line on the border on day one anyway, instead of doing what he did the first day he stepped into office, which was stop Trump's wall, end the embassy agreements with Mexico and Guatemala and Honduras, where basically refugee applicants would be processed in the country instead of coming over the border. He abolished all of that. So, this bill is like a phony kind of last minute thing a few months before an election and has nothing to do with reality. But Drew, the problem here, as I see it, is that Trump is going to win another landslide, just like he did in 2020, in spite of the rhinos and the uniparty. And yet, in 2020, Biden never even left the basement. I mean, he gave an interview to Cardi B, right? Didn't really talk to anybody. And yet he was, and the few appearances he had in public, remember they had those like rings, it must be because of COVID. Everybody,
6 people.
Yeah. And yet, we're told that he won this big election. I don't see anything stopping that from happening again. They still have the same apparatus in place to do it again, and they're going to do it again. They're going to do whatever they have to do. God forbid they might choose the Kennedy solution, if you get my drift.
Mm-hmm.
But, Trump is ahead, and they're going to do whatever they have to do to stop him, even possibly for personal reasons, such as that if Trump wins, they're all going to go to jail. I mean, what say you?
Well, I'm very concerned. I mean, we just have to push forward and take the country back no matter what. But we can't change our passion and patriotism because we fear what the left is going to do. That's what happened in 2020, remember. The courts, the left likes to say, oh, he lost 60-something court cases. There was no evidence of fraud. They didn't lose. Not a single one of those court cases was even heard on standing.
Exactly.
So these cowardly judges wouldn't do it because, and actually the left admitted it. There was this big article. I forgot what the magazine was. I've talked about it. I've heard Bongino talk about it before too. But they admitted what they did in 2020, the whole setup of it. And they had basically militant groups on the sidelines ready to go and riot and tear down America if the left didn't get their way, is intimidation. And to your point, talking about the Gestapo and everything else, that's the point. The FBI, all these organizations, this is absolutely reminiscent of totalitarian regimes, just like the Nazis in Germany in the 30s and into the 40s, obviously. So we can't, but they're trying to do this again. They want to intimidate us. They want us to say, like, oh, maybe we should not support Trump, or be kind of hesitant about our support for him because they hate him so much. And if we, this is what I call Trump fatigue syndrome. The left has Trump derangement syndrome, but we have Trump fatigue syndrome in response, which is the false calculation or belief that Trump's the problem and not the deep state and Democrats and the media. That if you just put DeSantis in or someone else, it's all going to go away and they're going to be nice again. None of that's true. We have got to back Trump. We have got to get him in there, and we have to be prepared. They are going to burn down the streets. They are going to burn down cities in America when it happens. Just get ready.
And even now, I mean, look, in advance of the 2020 election, you had the looting of black businesses, the burning of black neighborhoods, the shooting of black children in the aftermath of the George Floyd death, which is itself something that's questionable. You had this Antifa, which actually does go back to the days of pre-Nazi Germany. It was just as bad as the Nazis. They were street gangs who were communists. They have basically reemerged in the United States. They are very much part of the, from the river to the sea crowd supporting Hamas. And apparently they're going to be coming out in the spring, basically with protests to grant citizenship to millions of people. And when I say coming out in protest, I'm talking, destruction, looting neighborhoods, burning places. I mean, if Trump wins, it's going to be, you and I both lived through the atmosphere when the media declared Biden the winner. People started going out on the street. It was really vulgar, nasty, almost semi-rioting. Nobody gave a damn about Biden. They were just celebrating the defeat of Trump. That same ugly, hateful rabble-rousing group, well-funded by people like that notorious billionaire from Hungary and Reid Hoffman from LinkedIn and all these other fat cats and Zuckerberg, they're going to come out again and they're going to start destroying American neighborhoods.
Yeah. They are. I mean, we have to expect that at this point. We know it's going to happen, but that shouldn't change our resolve to do what's necessary to save the country. It's going to be ugly. People just need to get ready for that. And we don't know exactly how it's going to manifest itself, but we have to be prepared mentally, spiritually, physically, just to stand our ground. I mean, this is why I say this is the third major test we faced as a country now. Again, we're trying to resolve and take back our destiny peacefully. Unlike the American Revolution, where they didn't have another option, unlike the Civil War, where they didn't have an option. I mean, they ran out of options. This is a similar situation in the sense that we're trying to avoid violence, and the left wants violence, and they want violence to have an excuse to justify what would come for them next if they could do it, which is to, frankly, do what the Nazis did and just make it illegal to be a Republican or a conservative in this country. I mean, we already have kind of this 21st century Jim Crow that we've seen the Democrats put in place and implement, where basically, you saw Sarah Huckabee Sanders when she worked for the Trump administration. She was booted from a restaurant, the Red Hen it was called, by a Democrat owner. We've seen this across the board.
Well, we see demonization of groups that also reminds me, I'm sorry to bring it up again, but the Nazi era. I mean, I know it's not directly related, but people who refuse to get the jab, right? Mm-hmm. This is after the pandemic was over, and I'm not getting into whether or not one should. It's a personal choice, but you had a demonization. I mean, Katie Couric said that people should be put in concentration camps, and this was already after the pandemic was pretty much over. So you had a coordinated media effort in that regard. And it's interesting. I'm sure you've seen some of these videos. They're hilarious, where they show that every one of them is saying the same word, I don't know, a turning point. They all, right? I mean, this is how they do it. I mean, they send out a talking point and everybody echoes it in the media, and they have a virtual monopoly. Now, I think that we have to be prepared for some kind of a false flag. I don't know what it is. I hope it's not so bad, but these people will do anything. I mean, even recently there was kind of inklings of this. They're absurdly claiming that Trump is ill and that he's, like dealing with the pre-dementia. Can you imagine? I mean, given their candidate, I mean, Biden is almost like, he reminds me of the of the mother in the movie Psycho. He's like up in the attic, he's stuffed and with an apple in his mouth. But Trump is like, oh, and they actually did something with artificial intelligence where when he was coming out of one of these phony trials, he waved his hand and they put like red marks on the hand. Did you see that?
I didn't see that one.
Yeah, I mean, they made it look like his hand had some kind of an infection so that James Carville could come out and say Trump has syphilis. Well, it turns out that it was phony. I mean, it was artificially doctored. It was, like AI, and that Trump, there was nothing on his hand. He had no blemish at all. So that's only a hint of what they're going to do, I think, and I think they're saving it for the right time, where they're going to just pull some kind of crap that's going to just be really, really bad, and it's going to be completely false, just like the J6 thing. Everything you hear about that is untrue, complete lie, but yet people still who don't, the normies, as we like to call them, who just watch the 6 o'clock news, they don't know this.
Yeah, the worst is yet to come.
Yeah,
People can take that to the bank with him. We don't know what it's going to be, but there will be probably multiple things that happen. I mean, if you look at 2020 and what they did with the COVID pandemic, and of course
yes,
they roped everybody into. Look, people want to have this revisionist history now, and they want to pin everything on Trump and act like it was all his fault. The lockdowns, he didn't lock down any state. Governors did that,
no, he
and he
didn't.
made mistakes, but we were all there with him. And I always point, the GOAT, Rush Limbaugh, who everyone looked to for guidance. Granted, he was going through his own cancer problems at the time, but even Rush, who you could never fool on any of this crap, he
Mm.
also found himself in the category of like being worried about COVID and the pandemic. So it was very, very successful. And, we still don't have answers. I mean, what came
Well, it
first?
was it was not handled. I mean, Trump does. I mean, he does deserve some blame for the lockdowns and for listening to Fauci and Birx and preventing legitimate cures that have been used for decades, that a virus like hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. But uh, but nevertheless, you're quite right. I mean, you had people on the left like Governor Andrew Cuomo and de Blasio and others demanding that Trump declare martial law, demanding that the federal government come in. And Trump took the classic conservative federalist approach. He just said, look, it's up to the states to do it. Now, maybe he could have come out a little bit more and been critical, because as it was, they put masks on children and it was just
Mhm.
horrible.
Well,
But
it was.
nevertheless,
It
yeah,
was
but never,
horrendous.
yeah,
But my point is, revisionist history, hindsight's 2020. That's fine. Trump can take blame for certain things. But my point in bringing up COVID in any way is what I want to know still is, was it something that got out and then the Democrats and the deep state decided to turn it into this campaign issue that they could use to steal the election? Or was it planned as a release and it was in the works ahead of time? I mean, these are the types of questions I have. We know that our own government was involved in the creation of the virus.
right.
That's a matter of fact at this point. So I'm just saying, as an instance, if you look at what they did with COVID to use it to their advantage to win an election, what won't they do in 2024 this year if they were willing to do that and shut down
Well,
the
that's
country?
yeah. I mean, and I had Peter Navarro on my show thanks to your agency, who basically, and he was on the inner circle in Trump's administration, who said that it was a government created, virus, and that you mentioned something that ought to be pretty damn scary. What's to say they're not going to pull out another one in the months leading up to it, because they did use it to steal the election. That's a matter of fact. I mean, states circumvented state legislators who have the sole authority to regulate election law in their states, and they just created laws that removed voter verification. They did a junk mailing of ballots. I got several ballots. I mean, right? Millions of junk ballots. Just it's the largest junk mail in history. I mean,
Yep.
and so I mean, I don't know. I mean, it makes you think. We really are going to see it again, and they don't give a crap. They're going to do it in broad daylight, just like they did. They're going to just do whatever they have to do. I don't, I mean, I don't mean to sound an alarm here, and I agree that everyone needs to go out and vote, and everyone needs to get their friends and colleagues and relatives to join them. As the Irish in Boston, where I am, like to say, vote early and vote often. Just get
Hmm.
out and vote. But, there's just an apparatus that's still in place. And I mean, I don't know how we're going to overcome that.
Well, I mean, look, it's there's a nightmare scenario that's going to unfold ahead no matter what happens. I mean, look, nobody's going to accept the 2024 election results. That's what nobody's talking about, right? I mean, you have Hillary Clinton already going out there and saying it's going to be stolen by Republicans, in
Mm.
2024. But look, if I'm going to tell you this, I'll just be honest with you. If Biden wins in 2024, I'm not going to buy that bull crap. And you know what? If Trump wins in 2024, you think the Democrats are just going to take it and say, "Oh, he won." Something terrible awaits us in the future, and it's kind of like damned if you do, damned if you don't. But the stakes really are high. Look, the
Yeah.
Democrats have falsely characterized it as democracy is going to end if Trump wins. We're a constitutional republic, of course, but it really will end if Joe Biden's elected. So if you have this chasm in which on the right you believe that it's the end of the world if we lose, and on the left they believe it's the end of the world if we lose, I mean, you're just looking at a train wreck.
Yeah. And look, they're not running on any legitimate issues because on those issues they'll lose. And they are running on exactly what you've just implied, Drew, which is Trump is going to be a dictator, that he's an authoritarian, which is preposterous. I mean, he was president for 4 years, and there was nothing like that. I could see trying to say that maybe in 2016, maybe because he was an unknown. But now he's well known, and he was very moderate when it came to the role of government. There's absolutely nothing about his administration that even remotely resembled any kind of, fascism or dictatorship. And it's actually a very troubling development because Undersecretary Victoria Nuland, who was one of the architects of the color revolution in Ukraine, by the way, and who's pushing for U.S. involvement there, her husband is a major think tank, allegedly a libertarian, kind of they poses as a kind of a right of center guy. I forget his name right now, but he wrote an op-ed piece that was published in the New York Times where he said that Trump is like Mussolini, and it had all kinds of stuff in it that Steve Bannon, I think, accurately said constitute a dog whistle for assassination. Because after all, I mean, if we're going to get Mussolini, you might take a step. And I think that this whole argument of Trump as a fascist, it's obviously false, but they're gonna ride that one. They're gonna push that, and I mean, I don't can't imagine it working with your average person because it makes no sense. But that seems to be the main keystone of their entire campaign.
Look, there are a lot of stupid people in this country. I don't know how else to
Yeah.
say it, and many of them are the most educated. I mean, I've got doctor friends who are some of the most brilliant in their fields throughout this country, and they are far left lunatics, married to white women who are far left lunatics. Which exacerbates things, of course.
We can't go too far into that one. We can here, but YouTube, that's a no-no. But yes, and speaking of which, you've got Taylor Swift. You've got women now saying if that they're going to vote for Biden because Taylor Swift says so, and that if Trump wins, they're leaving the country. Which, by the way, good riddance. But neither way, that could peel. I mean, it just shows how dumbed down Americans are now that we would vote for somebody because a pop star says that they should. They don't give a damn about what he stands for. They don't know. It's so dumb. And yet you're going to get young women who are going to just walk along and do it, and that could tip an election.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm really like a lot of people. I mean, the whole point of the book too is just begging people to use their brains, rational thought. I mean, look,
Yes.
under Trump, we had it so good and they told us we had it so bad. Under Biden, we have it so bad. They tell us it's never been better. I mean, that's what we're dealing with here. And this is such a unique election, too, because look, Reagan looked into the camera during that one and only debate with Jimmy Carter and said, "Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago?" And obviously, he won in a resounding landslide because the answer to that question was no, we're not better off after Jimmy Carter. But
Right.
you had to just take Reagan's word for it. He'd been a governor, but he hadn't been a president. We've lived under Trump. We've lived under Biden. Are you better off under Biden than Trump? No one can objectively say that they're better off under Biden than Trump. If you have any sense of self preservation, if you're just even selfish, you would vote for Trump because our entire future is at stake with Joe Biden and this mess. But you're right. People have been dumbed down. Political factionalism that George Washington, of course, warned against has really taken over in this country. And so people don't care. I mean, they'd rather go down in flames as long as it's with their team.
Well, Drew, you really make a very passionate case, and I hope you're getting up on the media to make that case because as we move into the next months, people need to wake up. And whether you like Trump or not, this really is a kind of a last stand here. And that there's something going on in this country that doesn't feel right. It's more than just the bad economy and the people pouring over the border. 30% of young people now consider themselves to be non-binary. Where did that come from? Right? 5 years ago, who ever heard of it? The world looks like it's teetering on world war. You've got Biden releasing billions of dollars to Iran, and they're using it to fire missiles at American bases in Syria and Iraq, and to finance the Houthis, who are basically targeting cargo ships, and which can affect the supply line and will only add more inflation. Not to mention, funding their proxies, Hezbollah, who are firing missiles into Israel. That's world war. You've got Ukraine. They were not invaded under Trump because Trump supported Ukraine. Now all of a sudden, I think they're teetering on collapse. I mean, it's like this is what we're looking at in the world. I didn't even mention Afghanistan, the
Yeah.
worst defeat in the world history. I don't know where people, meanwhile, you've got Josh Sullivan, I mean, an article saying he's the greatest national security advisor since George Bundy. I mean, this is like really? I mean, what? It's like insane. You feel like there's like two realities going on here.
Yeah, and that's the thing we're going to have to grapple with. And look, I mean, it's like we're in an abusive relationship. And now that an election's coming up, Joe Biden and the Democrats are begging us, not to leave him, to stay with him.
Mm,
And I would remind people that there are many people who stay in abusive relationships because those coercive tactics work, the mind control. And this is why
mm.
my warning is don't just think we're going to go in and win. That's why we have to be the arbiters of truth. We have to be grounded, hang on and steady ourselves with facts, and remember the real record of this administration because it's the worst in US history. And we're going to be drowning in propaganda. And so it is going to take people and disorient them and confuse them. And so that's why we have to have a mastery of the facts, a mastery of what's been happening so that we can be those steady, objects that people can hold on to because, we will lose an opportunity if we just sit back and expect, the country to save itself.
Right, and it's not going to happen by accident. You have to get out and fight for it. Liberty doesn't just grow on the trees. You have to get up and you have to make it happen. You have to work toward it. I mean, your book has the famous Gadsden symbol on the cover. That's what that's all about. And your book, America's Last Stand, Drew, gets into all of these issues that you've raised, including the issue of the psyop nature of it, the brainwashing nature of it, the cultic nature of what people are dealing with unconsciously, which they have no idea. And so I really hope that you're able to knock this one out of the ballpark because we need voices like yours. We need to get it done. So, Drew, let my listeners know where they can get your excellent book and websites or anything else you'd like to share.
Well, sure. Thanks, Chuck. Yeah, yeah. You can. Amazon is the best place to get the book. It's in all formats, so Kindle, paperback, and then audio as well. I actually narrate it myself, so it's
Hmm.
better. It's more entertaining.
Good.
And then yeah, I've got a Substack, drewallen.substack.com. So I'm a columnist, so a lot of my stuff I haven't gotten in trouble yet. So I usually pump it out there, so you get to see it
Hmm.
first, and then it ends up somewhere American Greatness or BizPack Review or wherever. But those are the things I would plug for sure.
Excellent. Okay. So my guest is Drew Thomas Allen. The book is America's Last Stand. Will you vote to save or destroy America in 2024? Drew, thanks so much for joining me as always. And I really appreciate what you do and God bless. Thank you.